This is the Power Break Podcast number 218, titled Tomorrow. Hi, everyone. I'm Bob Brubaker, along with JT, as we hope you'll stay tuned as we seek to give you a little power in this break to help you succeed in the race of life.
This is the Power Break Podcast with a focus on the spiritual, the mental, and the physical aspects, all to help you succeed in the race of life. For show notes from today's podcast, go to bobbrubaker.com and follow the link for the Power Break Podcast. Dude, what's going on with you? I notice your One Breath from Death shirt on. I dig it.
Oh, yeah. It's always good to celebrate that. I was talking about that the other day. When I was preaching, I was talking about being ready to give an answer for the reason of the hope that is within you. I was preaching from 1 Peter chapter 3. And when I was doing that, I mentioned about everyone should have at least a 30 to 40 second testimony that is kind of piques the interest of people. And I said, mine is, of course, I ask people how they're doing, and they say, oh, okay, what are you? And then they'll eventually say, how are you doing? And I say, well, I was one breath from death, but look what God can do. If he can do this for me, what can he do for you? You know?
Yeah, that's true.
And it kind of gives people kind of to stump that. Anyway, so, it's been, since 2005 that happened, but I still like to bring it up and still like to wear the shirt around, and it does get comments from people. Anyway, what I want to get to today, before we start to talk about thanking our listeners and other things about the title of the show tomorrow, let's talk about today. And I understand today, as we record this, that you, JT, man of the law, of course, and expert downhill mountain biker.
Expert. That's funny.
And that now JT has retired from being the lawman. He also has taken up the art of cooking. Did I hear that you made a real, sure enough, apple pie from fresh apples in North Carolina?
That is a rumor that I can actually tell you is true. Yes. So we got this great idea that we were going to go apple picking. So basically how it works is you go and you buy basically the basket, right? And each basket.
Oh, well, that's cool.
Yeah. So you buy the basket and you can fill that basket up. But let me tell you, it's not cheap, right? So I'm like, okay, now we're going to end up with all these apples that only Amy and I are probably going to eat because, my boys, they have a thing against fiber. Anything that would cause their intestines to find joy in food, they try to stay away from. So anyway, I was like, something? I'm going to get on the internet. I'm going to do some research. I'm going to figure out some recipes. So I have made 2 pies, and dude, they're not like your average pie. Like, these things weigh like as much as my car, right? And the first one was delicious. So I just made another one, and then I made some apple butter, which has also been really good. But the recipe, I ended up making way too much apple butter, so now I'm probably going to either have to freeze it or end up throwing some of it away or giving it away or whatever. But I'm constantly trying to learn, Bob. I'm constantly trying to keep myself busy.
That's cool.
Yeah.
That's really good. That we call him Chef JT. Of course, now I'll just say that I know from experience that Chef JT is quite the master of the grill when it comes to steaks. And I'm sure other things too, but I have tasted his steak that's been grilled, and it is outstanding. So I'm sure that the apple pie is good. And if people want your recipe, they just write to JT at bobbrubaker.com, and JT will share his recipe.
We'll call it Grandma JT's old recipe or something. We'll make up something funny. Yeah.
Yeah, that's good. Well, JT, speaking of that, let's thank the listeners for hearing us, not only hearing us, but listening to the podcast, tuning in to the podcast, and also thank you for telling others about the podcast and taking time to leave us a rating and or a review wherever you download the podcast. It really does help, and we do really appreciate it.
We do really appreciate it. It's always humbling, and it helps other people find the podcast. So, so good, man. So good. And I appreciate everybody that takes the time out of their busy day to listen to us.
That's right. They take time to listen and also to leave us a rating or a review and even telling others. We appreciate it. Well, JT, today we're talking about tomorrow.
What?
Before we start to talk about tomorrow, this is today. So what does that title bring up to your mind?
Once again, you are on my same wavelength because recently with us trying to find, going through the process of buying a different house, a little bit closer to some of the places that we actually spend most of our time here in North Carolina, there's been a lot of me reciting scripture about worrying about tomorrow and not doing it. Focusing on today because today has its own troubles. Tomorrow will take care of itself. So that's what pops into my head is, tomorrow never comes, but we spend so much time worrying about it, right? Because every time you wake up, it's today. Yeah. It's not tomorrow anymore. So, that's what pops into my mind. How about you, man?
Well, as I wrote that, I thought about the various things we look at. Like sometimes we focus so much on tomorrow, we forget about the needs of today. Sometimes we are always putting things off until tomorrow. We assume that it will be there, and we just don't do what we should do today. Anyway, today we're going to talk about this and thinking about the brevity of life and taking it seriously, and how it's talked about in a number of places in the Bible, including the book of Proverbs, where it says, "Do not boast about tomorrow, for you do not know what a day may bring." Now, James quotes that and goes a little bit farther as he says that not to give the thought to the uncertainty of tomorrow, because to do so is sin.
Wow, that's interesting.
Today we talk about tomorrow.
Wow. Yeah. Let's continue to talk more about that as we go to your blog. Folks, if you haven't been over to BobRubaker.com, head over there. Check out the blog. At the very least, sign up so you can get that sent to you for free by the MailChimp Monday morning, and you're ready for the podcast that week, because we try to keep it to where both of them are the same topic. But anyway, let's continue to talk more about tomorrow today.
Well, we've all heard the saying, hopefully in jest, "Why do today what you can put off till tomorrow?" It may bring a little laugh or two, but it's really deadly saying that, because many things are easy to put off to tomorrow. And in doing so, we're actually sinning in our attitude, because we're assuming that we have tomorrow, and we may not. So what do you do? I mean, did I say sin? Yes, I did, if you put off things to tomorrow, because it's a deadly sinful attitude to assume that you'll have tomorrow. Follow the thought as we look back in the book of James, where he says, "Come now, you who say, today or tomorrow we will go to such and such a place or such a town to spend a year there and trade and make profit. You do not know what tomorrow will bring. What is your life? You may say you have this," he said, "but you are just like a mist that appears for a little while and then vanishes. Instead," James says, "you ought to say, if the Lord wills, we will live and do this or that. As it is, you boast of your arrogance, and all such boasting is evil. So whoever knows the right thing to do and fails to do it, for him it is sin." That's a pretty bold statement that he's making there. So notice the rebuke for the attitude of assuming that you will have this or that thing tomorrow, but you do not know what tomorrow will bring. Furthermore, says James, you should remember that your life is like a mist. It's here and then it vanishes. The correct way to look at things is to remember, if the Lord wills, we'll do this or do that. So is it his will to procrastinate? Not when we read that we're to redeem the time and make the most use of our time, as Ephesians chapter 5 tells us. Not only that, we have in the passage from James the rebuke for assuming that we have tomorrow, and a reminder of how brief our life is. It's kind of a rehearsal of how we ought to look at the things in the light of God's sovereignty. But there's also a reminder of the sinfulness of neglect. In addition to the sin of neglect in knowing what the right thing to do and not doing it, it is outright boasting when we assume we have tomorrow to do what we know we should be doing today. So Proverbs says, "Do not boast about tomorrow, for you do not know what a day will bring." Jesus warned his followers of going against his will either by neglect or intent as he spoke a parable about being ready for his presence by seeking to fulfill all that he has given his servants to do. We must also recognize that we often do not accomplish all that we have to do, and is the fact that most people take on too much. That means we must be constantly prioritizing according to what we say is important. When it comes to serving God, he must be the top, of course, in the priority list. What say you, JT? What do you think?
No, that's it. I mean, that's really it. I spend so much time worrying about tomorrow because, we kind of set things up to where, like with your bills, you pay your bills at the beginning or the end of the month. You have a lot of things scheduled out. So you can just kind of get things accomplished. So a lot of the times we really don't spend much time in today. Well,
that's a good point.
Yeah. And for me, today is the most important day because you can actually do something about today. Tomorrow, most of the time, maybe you can prepare. Like, we think about athletics. You don't want to just show up to try to run a marathon and you haven't done anything to prepare for it. But, it's the worry part that really we need to pay attention to. We need to be where we are today, present, and not be anxious about tomorrow because it doesn't add a moment to your life, does it?
That's an interesting point you brought up because it's like a fine point here. If you just boast about tomorrow, you think I can just put it off to tomorrow, then you're assuming everything will be there. On the other hand, we don't want to worry about tomorrow because we forget about today. So it's a fine point. We don't just throw it off and say, well, yeah, I have tomorrow anyway, and we don't worry about it. We are to live in the present. That's a good point, JT.
Thanks, buddy.
Good job. Well, check out the article. It's called Tomorrow, and the article is at bobbrubaker.com.
So what else is happening, Bob? Anything new this week you want the listeners to know about?
Probably would be a good idea to talk about the power of time management, since it seems to be in the mix of what we're talking about today. The Power of Time Management is a little book that I wrote, and you'll find it at bobbrubaker.com. It has some application, and it's applying some real good tips about time management, something I've studied for years. And it is really important if we're going to serve the Lord to make the most of use of our time. The Power of Time Management, and of course the sermon links to the sermons I preach here at Christ Community Presbyterian Church in Clearwater, Florida. It's all at the website called bobbrubaker.com.
This is the Power Break Podcast. I'm JT along with Bob Brubaker, and this is time on the podcast for questions and answers. If you have a question for me or for Bob, feel free to email me at bobbrubaker.com. It's actually, I did that for a second week in a row, Bob. Feel free to email me at jt@bobbrubaker.com, and we'll get to answering that question on an upcoming Power Break podcast. Definition of insanity, Bob, is doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result.
I was going to say, folks, JT has a lot on his mind. He's probably thinking about pies.
Probably thinking about tomorrow. Wait a minute. No. Anyway, all right, so question number one from the spiritual side of life. It's coming on pretty strong to say that procrastination is really sin, isn't it? I mean, can you explain yourself on that? Or, yeah, I don't know. I just think some of our listeners are going to be kind of put aback by that.
Well, it does put you back because, we never want to be told, hey, that's sin in your life. Well, that's what James says, as he talks about, we say today or tomorrow we'll go this and that and make trades and all that. He says, you don't know what tomorrow is going to bring. Remember that your life is like a mist. Instead, what we ought to say is that now if the Lord wills, I have this plan to do this. And we need to be always thinking about what does God have in mind for me to do and commit our time to him. So he says, boasting then that you have tomorrow. In other words, if you're procrastinating, just putting things off till tomorrow, you're really boasting that you have tomorrow, and you really don't know that. And that's why when he says that in that paragraph in James 4:13 through 17, then he comes right in with the hammer and he says, Whoever knows to do the right thing to do and fails to do it, for him it is sin.
Right.
Now, what is he talking about there? Well, he's talking about being prideful, being proud of having tomorrow. And he says one of the ways that we have that comes out in our lives is when we put off till tomorrow what we should be doing today. In other words, we're procrastinating. Okay, in that, he goes on to say that if you know the right thing to do and you don't do it, that's sin. Now, Ephesians says that we're to look carefully how we ought to walk in this life, not as unwise but wise, and make the best use of our time because the days are evil. So, that's why he says in Proverbs, do not boast about tomorrow because you don't know what today or tomorrow, what a day will bring. Putting that all together, yes, we would have to agree with James. If we squander what God has given to us and put it off, I realize there's legitimate things like, say you have a priority list of your to-do, and you're working through that priority list, and today you didn't get through to it, and so you focus and it's going to go on tomorrow's list. That's one thing. But the other thing is if you know you should do it now and you put it off.
Yeah.
Don't do that.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. You know, we had a tragedy happen up here in our town. On Sunday night, there was a family driving home. I don't know where they were coming from, but a person coming the opposite way went into their lane, hit them head on, and their fifth grader was killed in the crash. So one of the things that I try to think about always, and you and I have talked about this a lot, is, you know, making the best use of your time because the days are short, and you don't know if you have tomorrow. Like as a fifth grader, the expectation is that child's got plenty of life in front of him. You know, as a 50-year-old, there's an expectation that I have life in front of me. As a 12-year-old, you can put any kind of age on that. But the point is, man, what did I not get done because I put it off until tomorrow? What did I not do that God put me here to do because I didn't focus on staying the course? I didn't focus on getting up and being productive. You know, I think a lot about tithing your time to churches because a lot of people do not tithe time. As Americans, I think we would rather just throw money at a problem as opposed to actually throw ourselves at it.
Oh, that's right.
So, you know, tithing your time is really important. And I remember you talking about, you know, sit down and think about how much time you spend doing certain things in your life, and you'll figure out what's actually important to you. And that's always pretty sobering. So, you know, putting off all these things for tomorrow, I'll be a better Christian tomorrow. I'll be a better dad tomorrow. I'll be a better, you can name whatever. We can't do that, can we, Bob? Because tomorrow is never going to come. And it's actually an arrogance for us to think that we're going to be able to do it tomorrow.
That's right. And as you were mentioning that tragedy, some of the things are wake-up calls in our lives to realize, you know, we may not have tomorrow.
Yeah.
And, you know, that's why one of the sayings is, you know, it's good to hug those and to make sure that the people that you love know that you love them every day because you don't know that you'll have tomorrow to say that.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So let's go into the mental aspect. So I know you like to talk about it because you're a time management guy. But how can we get a handle on avoiding the sin of procrastination and make the best use of our time?
Well, I'm a time management guy because, as I mentioned a number of times, that when I first got into the ministry, I was just overwhelmed about all the things I needed to do and just trying to get a handle on getting things done. And so a friend of mine who was really into time management gave me a little he actually pulled out the day timer that he was using. It had an ad that you could subscribe to it, and so I did. And he said, order the books, the tapes, and everything else, and be a student of time management. That was great counsel for a young man in the ministry. Anyway, to prioritize a to-do list and your work schedule means you prioritize. That means and many times you reprioritize because you realize, as Ephesians chapter 5 says, that we're to look carefully how we walk, not as unwise, but as wise. And how do we do that? We make the best use of our time because the days are evil. In Romans chapter 12, it simply says, I appeal to you, therefore, brothers, by the mercies of God, to present your bodies as a living sacrifice. That means every part of you dedicate to God and you recommit to God and realize that He is the one who needs to lead you, because you need to discern what the will of the Lord is. So you're not doing your will, you're doing His. And that's why when Jesus was asked, what is the most important commandment? He said, the most important commandment is the Lord our God is one, and you shall love the Lord your God with all of your heart, with all of your soul, with all of your mind, with all of your strength. Now, that means we live that way. We prioritize according to that. And that means we take the list of the things we need to do. You think of those things, just keep adding them to the list, and then you go through and prioritize. What is the most important thing I could be doing, living up to what this standard that God has given to us is? And then we prioritize. Many times we start to do the things that are the most flashy, that we really enjoy, or the things that that have the most urgency to them. They may not be the best things to do. And so learning to do that, it takes time to do that. It takes an effort to write down the things. And as they say, if it's on your to-do list and it's on your schedule, you're more apt to do it. So many times we say, I'll think of that. Don't even think like that. Just put it in on a list. Anyway, that's one way I find it really does help. How about you, JT?
Yeah, so many times I have thought about, and actually you pop in my mind a lot when it comes to this. Amy and I joke around, there would probably be nothing worse than to pull into heaven and you've got this pristine body and God will be like, you didn't use this thing. What happened? It still got miles on it because you didn't really do anything with it, And then I think about you pulling in and God being like, wow, man, Bob's got 2 brand new knees, still walks a little messed up. he's, you know what I mean? Like, you set this thing on fire as you were going through life. And that's because you don't let yourself sit still. You understand we only got a set amount of time. We are like the flowers of the field. We bloom and then eventually we're gone. That's just the way it is. So if you know that, and we all know that, nobody wants to talk about it, then, make a priority of today, because tomorrow will take care of itself. But today when you get up, I'm positive there's some things that you can do for the people around you, for God, for yourself, that will be productive, and don't show up and be that guy with that, with the brand new car when you show up to heaven. Show up with that Volkswagen that you destroyed. You know what I'm saying? You got it done, and that's what it's all about.
Good thanks, JT.
All right, question number 3 from the physical side of life. So what do you think about caffeine and exercise? Man, there is such discussion about this. It's like it never goes away. And I think it's
I like it.
I like it too, but I'm a caffeine guy. People used to joke around because at SWAT school when I was teaching there, everybody'd show up in the morning, and they'd be all hydrated with their Gatorade, and I'd be sitting there with a coffee in my hand. We'd go for a run, and I'd actually go for a run with my Dunkin' Donuts coffee in my hand.
You're stereotyping yourself.
I know. It's pretty awful. But the simple truth is I'm a coffee guy. So I think caffeine's a good thing. But I will tell you, Amy falls on the other side of that argument. She avoids caffeine when it comes to exercise. Like a lot of the different like gels and nutritional supplements that have caffeine, she'll avoid those completely.
No. Well, a lot of people do. Now, the good in caffeine is the fact that it decreases the glycogen depletion in the first 15 minutes of exercise, so it encourages your body to start burning fat. The bad thing about it, it tends to increase the rate of dehydration.
That's right.
So when you put those together, that's what you have to weigh out. Is it good to do? So understandably, endurance athletes are always in search of a boost to have energy and performance. More often than not, caffeine is the go-to for athletes, but it is also caffeine that has, it brings up the question, is it really safe? According to the American College of Sports Medicine, caffeine may be the most widely used stimulant in the world. It can come in many forms, such as coffee, nutrition supplements, tea, soft drinks, energy drinks, chocolate. Caffeine can also reach high levels in the blood approximately 1 hour after ingestion, and it may have a stimulating effect on the brain as well as effect on blood pressure, pulse rate, and stomach acid production, and even fat stores. So many athletes use caffeine as a potential aid and performance enhancer. Now, caffeine may also assist in enhancing recovery after exercise. So there might be some good in that, JT. And yep. I know that some people don't like it because it does have that tendency to speed up your dehydration
yep.
in your body. Yep. For that reason, many people avoid it because they don't want to be dehydrated. They're trying to hold on to their hydration through their exercise period. But it may give you that little kick to get it started. And as they pointed out in the research, that it sets your body off to start burning fat rather than glycogen. And you'll need that glycogen somewhere along the way if you're doing a long period of time.
Yeah, that's right. It's interesting. I ran into a guy on a ride up here, and he actually works for a sport nutrition consulting firm. And one of the things that he talked about, he showed me some of the gels that he used and stuff like that. And caffeine actually was a part of our conversation. And they actually have a lot of, he was talking specifically about, I don't know what the name of that discipline is, but basically you start off you're on a velodrome and you go as far as you can in a certain amount of time. I can't remember what that discipline's called.
Okay.
And he talked about how those guys are so dialed in with what's going on with their body that they'll use caffeine to actually flush themselves a little bit as far as hydration is concerned, because they measure hydration down to how much weight you're going to gain or lose and how much time you're going to lose based on that. So they actually keep themselves right in that hydration zone. They're not overhydrated. They're not underhydrated. They're right there. And oftentimes they'll use a caffeine supplement if they feel like they're overhydrated to get through that water a little bit quicker. So yeah, I mean, we're coming down to some major science here. But interestingly enough, I have always found that caffeine has been a benefit to me when it comes to working out. I
like it.
Yeah, I don't know if my body is just one of those bodies where it's like, I don't mind being I'd rather be a little dehydrated and be burning fat as opposed to the other way around. But yeah, caffeine's always been a good thing for me. But I have found absolutely the best thing is the amino acids when you're working out.
Yeah, essential amino acids.
Yeah, make sure you get into those branch chains and make sure you'll be amazed at how much energy you feel like you have after about a half an hour after a good dose of branch chain amino acids. But anyway, yeah, I don't know. I'm for it. That's my vote. I'm placing it right here, right now.
I'll have a cup of coffee on that one.
I'm going to have another one after we get done, buddy. So it's good.
Yeah. So when we talk about caffeine in your exercise, it takes discipline to find out what works and what doesn't, but it really will pay off in the long run. So as we talk about, discipline does make the difference in all aspects of life. So check out today's show notes at bobbrubaker.com. Click on the Power Break podcast. Today is show number 218.
And submit your questions by email to jt@bobbrubaker.com and listen for our answer on an upcoming Power Break podcast.
Quick word for the power of time management. We've talked about this a number of times, but of course, if you haven't received the book or got the book, get over to bobbrubaker.com, click on the resources, scroll through the resources to the books, and through the books you'll find it. The Power of Time Management at bobbrubaker.com.
Well, thank you for joining us for the Power Break podcast. Please subscribe and leave a review wherever you've downloaded the podcast, and check out show notes, news, Bob's weekly blog, and other cool things at bobbrubaker.com. And listen next time for the Power Break podcast.